Chapter 11. Flight into Gorn. 58. The exhausted jailer entered the dark suite, back bent so that his hairy knuckles drugged the ground. Chains hung from his belt, clanking as he waddled forward. He squinted into the darkness. Status report on the traitor, sir. A mechanical hiss. Go ahead. Is he dead? No, answered the mutant Gytho recruit, breathing heavily. He went to all fours on the floor near the foot of the bed, head bowed subserviently, and crawled forward. His knuckles were bloody. One bone showed through the skin. Worked on him all day, but not dead. Not yet. He is drugged to stay alive and sutured. The doctors gave him goat blood and meat fluids even now. The commander did not respond immediately, not even a movement of hand or eye. A minute later, his head gently nodded. Good. More pain, General Jacquerod? The recruit muttered nervously. Still, he suffers greatly, even now. The dark figure standing in the shadows paused to straighten his broad shoulders and square his jaw. Let him rest tonight and suffer more as he is, he answered, ripping his collar open. The moon, through the skylight, cast a sullen blue line around his angular silhouette. You may rest too. Aye. When he dies, send his carcass to his mother in Fargok. Do you understand? Aye, General. Recruit? Yes, sir. The general drew a pensive breath. What do the others say about this soldier? The others? General Jacquerod turned toward him with an impatient glance. They called him a traitor, a blasphemer, a coward. They say he was strong once, but grew weak, and that he went insane. Insane? He asked. Yes, you could call love insane. Yes, the Gytho answered, stealing a look up from his place on the floor with one yellow eye. He's very strong, sir, and resilient. Yes, that he was. He was my brother, the general said. Yes, sir. Not by blood, of course. No, sir. The general stood in thought for a few more moments while the jailer uncomfortably waited to be dismissed. Yes, well, he finally said, most importantly, recruit, again, did he ever speak of the curse? Did he admit to revealing any part of it to the stone bearer? The slave shook his lowered head. No, sir. I could never detect any acknowledgement or awareness of any kind of curse, General. We interrogated brutally with hallucinogens until he lost consciousness this last time and was unable to be revived. He never admitted even knowing about it. Are you sure, recruit? This was one of the elite. He knew of Gilgahar's great curse. Of that I am sure. I only need to know if he betrayed it to our enemy. No, sir, nothing. No subtle indications at all. Nothing about the family of Nicolaus Day and their inability to ever live past having children. The spiritual disease that ends their immortality. Did he speak of that? No, sir. Nothing like that whatsoever. The jailer answered, somewhat confused. I see. General Jacquerod turned back to the trees, passed outside in the small porthole window of his private quarters. That concerns me greatly. I fear that Out of guilt and pride, he is now denying any knowledge of ever knowing it. With his last vestiges of consciousness and mental control, to keep us from finding out the truth about what he has done. He is willing to endure torture and carry that one betrayal to the grave to keep us from knowing. Admirable and tragic. Yes, sir. Has he asked for mercy? For death? The torturer shook his head. No, he said, but speak. The slave cleared his throat. In his Clarum-based delirium, he does keep asking for someone over and over. Some Ozayarabix? If I'm understanding him correctly, it's hard to make out any words with the damage we've done to his jaw. He has no tongue or teeth. The great Gharnian general looked at him flatly, emotionlessly. That name was not unknown to him. Ozaya Abix, the mythological sorcerer, savior of the first dynasty, as he was known in tales. But Ozaya Abix did not truly exist. Just a Wudan legend, nothing else. As most did while dying, the broken prisoner was hallucinating in the last phases of his life, seeking redemption, salvation, peace, mercy, seeking the gods. But even in the stories, Ozaya Abix was no god. He was but a sorcerer of some renown. That's all, recruit. You may retire for the evening. I tell Captain Dehar to keep one fighter brigade hidden along the southeastern perimeter of this orchard tonight, and send the rest onto the Gornian River as we had previously discussed. I'm going to do some work here tonight, and I don't want to be disturbed for a few hours. Let him know. The recruit bowed obediently and left. General Jacarod watched the lead torturer hobble away down the polished silver corridor. Gaithotes made such good slaves once broken, he thought. Of course, this one would have to be eliminated after Kadazat passed on, because he knew of Gilgahar's curse and Kadazat's treachery notwithstanding. The curse still had to remain a secret of the Gharnian elite alone. The Gharnian general finished undressing and lay naked upon his hard bunk of cold steel, fingers interlocked behind his plasteel-plated skull. This was such a sad irony. He had known General Kadazat from the time he was a minor admiral, and he had served with him for many years in Ash, while they both trained through several levels of the Gharnian elite. Kadazat had been an exemplary, dedicated soldier whom Jacarod had admired and emulated. But Kadazat had never been a believer, and it eventually drove in a wedge. He had fallen in love. Fool. That was clear now. Even after taking that temptation away, Kadazat's heart would not return to his career. All the training and military expertise in the world could not fill a longing soul. A Gharnian's heart should only seek the religion, the one. Sky General Moon Jacarod himself was a true believer, and it made him complete, fulfilled, righteous. Reflecting on his many experiences in the field with Prince Kadazat, he was both saddened and angered. What a waste of life! What a waste of time and military resources! He went to his study to write some notes in his journal before retiring. It is late. Sunborn the 27th, Miraday, 432 4.12c. Side General Moon Jakarat of the KSR 3. Closing record of the day. Update. The traitor Kadazat has revealed much on this day, yet his testimony reveals a troubling paradox for me. It is true. The prophecy is realized exactly as the Great One revealed to the elite. Under extreme duress, General Kadazat confirmed the existence and arrival of a very young Median king, Jameson Day, by his own personal contact in the fields of Tush, no less. He spent some time with young King Day on his small skycraft Stardeer while recuperating injuries. He spoke to him and they exchanged information. My fear is that it is possible that the traitor committed the ultimate blasphemy by revealing to the enemy the familial curse of Day's Bane, O Gilgahar the Great, which the elite has kept in confidence for so many generations. This has not yet been confirmed or denied, but we are still attempting to assimilate relevant information while the prisoner still lives. Kadazat's silence on the matter gives me cause to believe the damage is now done, and he intends to carry that treacherous secret to his grave of dust. This will be his great revenge for the wrongs he believes we have done him. However, the good news of the day is that Kadazat confirmed the Boy King's pursuit of the Great Stone, somewhere near our present location on the eastern border of central Gorn, and we are currently in close pursuit. King Day is much younger than we expected, perhaps no more than 15 or 16 years old. He is traveling with a small group of soldiers and rangers. This crew has proven themselves resilient, resourceful as prey, and amazingly elusive. We have trailed them this far, hit or miss, and now that we have lost them again, I am very concerned. General Jakarat scowled, hissing through his crooked front teeth, frustrated. His mission seemed simple enough in theory: locate the Stone of Power and bring it back to Garn. The Elder Gharnian elite had agreed that capturing King Day was the key to fulfilling this mission, to guide them to it, willing or unwilling. They had set all of their roaming forces on this singular premise, so as of yet, at least, they had been following him toward it. The only catch to this plan was to ensure that the young king himself could not be allowed to reach the powerful instrument first, which would prove disastrous. Yes, Jakarat's mission was simple in theory, but it was proving more difficult than he had ever imagined. In fact, now he felt that he was on the brink of failure, which could condemn him. I now declare an executive mandate on a field decision, as described in Tabula 77, chapter 4.9, verses 83 through 91, concerning mission alteration from apprehension to termination under extreme prejudice, and seek elite approval as soon as possible. Consideration point. The enemy draws nearer to the stone with every passing hour, and we have been unable to keep them in our sights. Their skycraft entered a large orchard grove at point 44B, 88.7, less than 1 day ago. From the few clues we have been able to obtain, we have missed them here. Again, it is virtually impossible for them to have eluded our massive forces in this sector, but they somehow have. And we are rapidly running out of time and options. I believe that we have but days left before it is too late. They may reach the great stone of power before we do and escape with it. This is unacceptable. They cannot be allowed to slip through our fingers yet again. Therefore, apprehension is no longer an option. It is time for more effective measures. I will be addressing our warship commanders at dawn with new instructions. We will take down this Stardeer and her crew upon the next sighting, by any means necessary, and scavenge what we may from the rubble, hopefully a survivor. Best case scenario, King Day himself. The traitor Kadazat may have nothing left to offer us. He is now on the final brink of death and awaits us to release his life, which he will not be getting anytime soon. I am retiring for the evening, for I expect a glorious day of hunting on the morn. Please respond with due speed via message sphere. For Gorn, end log. General Moon Jakarad, commander of the Khazar 3. He sent this message sphere, placed his journal aside, and pressed a bedside comm button. Sir, came a voice. Send in a boy. I'm not to be disturbed until dawn. Aye, sir. '59. Stardeer was 100 miles away from the orchards by dawn that next morning, the crew having decided to leave shortly after the encounter with the fell beast at the cabin. They were haunted and exhausted by that encounter, unable to free themselves from the harrowing chill and the heavy shadow it had left upon them. They hoped that the faster they flew, the better they would feel. They were trying to quickly put in some distance behind them and escape from the weight of it, but that did not happen. The unrelenting dread and fear that clung to them like airy wisps of night. They could not agree among themselves what form the beast had appeared to them, and argued about what they had heard and seen that past night, but most recalled that it was much like a great dog or wolverine. Devlin explained that the Morgoth was a shapeshifter, a demon from an elder age, appearing different to anyone that came across its path, and that it could by will take any form it chose. All they could agree upon was that it knew them and their purpose, and that it recognized Jasmine Day as the Stone Seeker and heir to one of the stones. Worst of all, there were no more masquerades. It knew she was a she, not a king, which meant that the enemy now knew her true identity. And it wouldn't be long before Gilgahar knew of the ruse, if he didn't somehow already know. If the Morgoth knew their location, so would the Gharnians now. No offense intended, Commander Binder said to Deadland Dane, but We may need a bigger and better skycraft for fierce warfare than your Stardeer pleasure craft. The sky above was clear and the air was warming by the minute. Quan was in the controls once more with Percy close by his side. They kept a direct course southeast, zigzagging below the bristled treetops. The scraggly trees were scattered sparsely around the bases of the dry hills, like brown, thorny crowns on bald pates. The terrain below was rough and rocky, still dotted at intervals with an occasional barren, vagrant apple tree. Quan had become quite a decent pilot over the last few days. Percy had complimented his skills, suggesting that he was a natural-born flyer. "Your forefathers must have been birds," he had commented. Gabriel, Dreher, and Ott kept a vigilant watch for enemies on all fronts. They remained anxious and uneasy, circling the perimeter of the ship throughout the morning hours with scans. They had spotted a transportation craft in the distance being boarded by Gharnian police for scrutiny investigation. Devlin and Dreher were often off by themselves, deep in conversations. Much had happened that required their sound expertise and interpretation. Lake had not been idle. He had shown an interest in how the large mounted blasters work, so Binder took time to show him operation and maintenance techniques between his watches. He showed him where the ammunition was stored and how it was loaded, and he gave him a brief lesson on the firing of the powerful guns. "Believe me, it's got a kick to it," he warned. Unfortunately, only 2 of the blasters were now functioning properly. The third one had suffered irreparable damage at the hands of the Twister and Tuss. Jasmine came up on deck for the first time that morning. All eyes turned to her, and more than one jaw dropped. She was certainly not the same girl they had watched retire the night before. The change in her was striking, absolute and phenomenal, both inside and out. A strange and miraculous transformation had occurred overnight, like that of a homely caterpillar emerging as a beautiful butterfly in the rays of the morning suns. It was as if a curtain had been lifted from around her, revealing someone completely new, grim and regal. She looked beautiful. Her clean, wispy hair was pulled back from her face and tied up with a white ribbon, revealing narrow shoulders and a long, statuesque neckline. The suns made her new eyes sparkle like jewels of light sapphire blue. She had left her restraining corset and shoulder pads below, and she had cinched her thin waist with a fine belt. There was no denying her blossoming womanhood anymore. In fact, she was undeniably lovely. Looking at her, her demeanor and her regal air caused some of the gloom that had lingered from the previous night's horror to immediately dissipate. But that was not the only change they noted. She seemed to have suddenly matured and hardened, as if having stepped into a new, truer role, accepting another more appropriate identity. One by one, she addressed the crew, asking for news and updates. She was curt and aloof when addressing them as she circled the craft, inspecting it and the men as they performed their various duties. There was no doubt that the encounter with the great dog had changed her and marked her in a rather dark, serious way. She alone had had the innate courage and strength to stand before the thing and confront it. Some of whatever force of will she had summoned the night before remained ingrained within her from that point forward, and the crew could feel it whenever in her presence. She was stronger and more resolved, as if her heart had hardened and her blood had chilled. Devlin made a brief attempt to be cordial, but Jasmine dismissed him. She was all business this morning. We must get through this day, she told him curtly. Continue your preparations. The crew remained on edge throughout the afternoon. The provisions were low, so a meager lunch and dinner came and went under Dreher Freygood's apt supervision. Fried apples and walnuts and candy tree seeds and some thin barley soup from leftovers with some hard bread for dipping. Eventually, Devlin grew more concerned for Jasmine as the evening wore on and her brooding continued. He watched her from beneath a furrowed brow, trying to discern her needs. But there were some subjects of which wizards have little knowledge or understanding, and one of them is the science of women's emotions. If there even was a knowledge or understanding of the science of women's needs and emotions, he thought, which he doubted. The only sure predictions about them was that they were intuitive and unpredictable. When Gabriel, who was speaking quietly with Percy and Ott, happened to glance in his direction, the wizard motioned toward her with a nod of his head, as if saying, "Go talk to her, fool." Gabriel nodded. He excused himself from his friends and crossed the deck to join her at the front rail. He looked so grave and distant to him, detached and emotionless, like a sad statue of a bygone era. She did not notice him approaching at first. She peered toward the southeast as if staring into a dim, unknown future, the wind hard in her face. "Oh," she said as he drew close. "Hello." You seem preoccupied," he said to her. Jasmine teased with a smile, but it was quickly extinguished. "Yes," she said, I guess I am focused. You look very nice today." She looked at him fleetingly, then back out at the horizon, making him wonder whether his compliment had been appropriate. Thank you," she replied, nearly telling there was no need for compliments. A few moments passed, and Jasmine took the initiative and broke the awkward silence. "I've never heard of talking birds before," she said. "That was a strange and unexpected turn, wasn't it?" "Well, they must be very rare," he said. "Intelligence must not be regulated by brain size." She glanced from the corner of her eye. "Depends upon which human you're comparing them to." He smiled and shrugged, nodding in agreement. Below them, a gypsy caravan was entrenched in a deep gully, cinched tight between three craggy hills, set up there to prey upon the slack morals of the nearby town to the west. There was a battle pit erected in the center of the camp between the weather-beaten brown tents, and two local fighters were visible, engaged in hand-to-hand combat. There was a decent crowd pressing in around the brutal event, placing wagers, cheering and booing in succession, and scarcely an eye was raised as Stardeer passed by silently overhead. "You know," Gabriel said, now choosing his words with care, "I can still remember hearing the news of your father's death when I was just a boy." Jasmine looked firmly up at him. "I wasn't more than 10 or 12, I guess, training in the battle pits outside Din Diane, much like that one right down there," he replied. "My favorite Mahekian war master, Jesse, I called him Jesse Boy, told me about it. Jesse was very smart and funny, as far as Mahekians go. The youngest war master in our kingdom, so we got along famously. He often had news about things going on in the wide world beyond the Persian territory. He was proud of his people and all their responsibilities. He considered Mehekians the stewards and protectors of the entire continent of kingdoms. He was deeply proud of that. Jasmine smiled and nodded. They're so unique, aren't they? And knowledgeable about things that go on around the world. He boasted to me about a secretive network that his brotherhood maintained, kingdom-wide. She was curious. Well, he said that, because of their telepathic abilities. They could pass information faster and more efficiently than comms or message spheres anywhere throughout the kingdom from coast to coast, north, south, east, west. He said that his people were the blood in the veins of this land. I learned to believe him because he always knew things even before my father did. But sometimes I didn't know whether I believed all of his tall tales, especially the strange stories coming out of the West. About us in Mead. I remember him telling me once that Mehekians had been secretively traveling from Almeid to the mainland for centuries. I found that both entertaining and amusing at the time. He said that's how the stories of your family would spread for the Mehekian traders along the west coast. By the time that the news reached us, our people couldn't tell truth from rumor. I suppose that's why people stopped believing. Including you. Well, that's not true, he said. I didn't stop believing. I never believed in the first place. I just enjoyed Jesse's stories. She put her hand on his for a moment, then withdrew. And now? Do you need to ask? She nodded with a melancholy eye. Oddly enough, I never saw Mehekians at home growing up. They are virtually invisible there. Watchers, Gabriel said suddenly. They're like the Ranger Watchers, the Watchers of the North. Watchers of the North, who are they? Society of woodsmen. Very secretive and very dangerous, he said, but noble men and women. Good men. I've supped with them and shared camp with them on occasion. But they don't talk much. They're very thoughtful and mysterious. I've always believed that they could be a formidable force should a need rise. They're like the Mehekians in many ways, then, she nearly mumbled. Devlin probably knows a lot more about the Watchers than I do. I'm sure Dreher does. He might be one. Jasmine sighed. I was just a baby when my parents died, she went on with his first words. Barely 2 years ago, or so, I was told. But now I wonder about the accuracy of anything I was taught about in my life. My childhood is shrouded in protective lies. I'm beginning to see the sense in it now, though. Secrets and lies were crafted to protect me and hopefully end the damn curse, though that remains to be seen. I can't even remember them now. My parents, other than in dreams, and I can only wonder at the accuracy of those memories now, she said. She stood silent for a few moments as emotion welled up inside of her. All of this, it's so hard bearing this burden alone without them. Gods, I long to hear their voices. I don't recall the sound of my mother's voice, Gabriel. I might not have known them, but still I miss them terribly. I miss their love. You know what this means, Gabriel, this curse of Catazats? I will never be able to share my love with my own children, either, if I ever have any. I will never even know my children. just like all my forebears, my grandparents, and my own parents. If I ever fall in love and have a child of my own, I'll succumb, shrivel, and die, and I'll never know them. I'll never be able to sing to them, to teach them, to discipline or cherish them. And they'll never remember my love either. A tear broke loose and rolled down her cheek. Knowing what I do now, I can't do that to an innocent child. Never. It's just too cruel. Jasmine. She turned to him. I must face this cursed reality. I can never have a baby of my own, or I'll die. He gently wiped her tears with his thumb. Shh, he said to soothe her. Don't cry. Listen, we can break this damn curse. What a horror, she repeated. It's not fair. Shh, listen to me. We'll find a way to break Gilgahar's damn curse. He said, if it was made, it can be unmade just the same. I've already been speaking with Dedlan Dane and Drer Freygood about this, and they agree. It was a blessing to have come across Kadazat the Gharnian out there in the fields of Tush, Jasmine. It was a blessing that he didn't die first. And a miracle that your kind words loosened his tongue. We know about this curse now, which is an insight your forebears never had. You will not suffer the same fate as your parents did, and theirs before them. This I promise you. We'll find a way to break this horrible black magic curse. I'll find a way. There's strong magic out there in this world, bad and good. I know, I've seen it all firsthand. But at what price? She said, eyes welling anew. Magic costs, and not just in money and gold and jewels. The sacrifice is often the price of a soul. Let me worry about that, he assured her. You'll raise your children and your grandchildren, and even your great-great-great-great-grandchildren. This I swear to you, on my life and my kingdom. A trembling smile crossed her wet face, and new tears sprung forth upon her cheeks. He could always make her smile. I could never live with myself with that horrible curse upon you, he said, gently stroking her hair. You have become so very dear to me. Jasmine stepped toward him, encircling her arms around his neck. You always make me feel like everything will work out even when I can't see it, she said. Thank you so much, Gabriel. She pressed her body tightly to him and held on for a good while, and it felt so good to her. Just holding him there like that. He was big and strong and warm. Thank you for being here with me through all of this, for everything you've done. I don't know what I would have done without you. Just be patient about having those children, he bemused. We still have time. She laughed through her tears once again. Yes, we do. Thank you, Gabriel. Wasn't expecting anything soon. $60. Can we get any lower? Dedlan said, scans at his eyes. There's another warship about a mile to the south heading north-northwest. We need to get below their field of vision. Follow that cliff line, Percy advised, nodding toward a shallow limestone outcropping, and Cran obeyed. They were still at full speed, less than 10 feet above the ground. The real danger of flying thusly was the possibility of crashing into a sudden tree or a rock face. Cran also sheared through thin, leafless branches and withered saplings in order to keep their current speed and altitude. The branches were brittle and nearly exploded from the impact, littering the deck with dry kindling and splinters. There are Gharnian ships on every horizon, Ott snarled. We're in a tightening snare, Dedlan. It's a miracle that we haven't been spotted. We have to do something. Decide fast, Dreher Freygood said. Gharnian River, just ahead. Stop here then. Find a place to dock, Devlin said, eyeing the greenish-blue strip of water appearing beyond the heels of the Sienna Hills directly in their path. It is just too dangerous to cross a river openly during the day until we've had a chance to reconnoiter. They'll be monitoring this river for 100 miles in all directions. The crew nervously looked for any possible refuge that could hide a fighter ship. There, Gabriel said, pointing. Look there. That oak tree, that's big enough, and the foliage is thick. Find a way to wedge inside the branches, Quan. Yes, perfect. We'll rest there. We may have to wait until dark to cross into Gorn, the wizard advised. He appeared tired and old to them. His eyes lolled in hollow sockets. He suddenly stopped and froze, slack-jawed, staring silently directly into their path. It's just too dangerous to cross the river openly during the day until we've had a chance to reconnoiter. They'll be monitoring this river for 100 miles in all directions. The crew nervously looked for any possible refuge that could hide a fighter ship. There, Gabriel said, pointing. Look there. That oak tree. It's big enough and the foliage is thick. Find a way to wedge inside the branches, Quan. Yes, perfect. We'll rest there. We may have to wait until dark to cross into Gorn, the wizard advised. He appeared tired and old to them, his eyes lolled in hollow sockets. He suddenly stopped and froze, slack-jawed, staring off into nothingness as though he just realized something very important. Before anyone could speak to them, he snapped out of it, shaking his befuddled head. Blast these infernal Gharnians! Carry on! I'm going below to take a nap. Well, we can't wait too long, Jasmine told him. The enemy is thickening like flies on dung around here, and I feel something else. We're still being tracked. She cut off in mid-sentence. They knew of what she was speaking. It's not too far behind us. They landed and hid the ship. The day passed slowly, but eventually night came. Heavy clouds obscured what might have been a bright midnight sunrise that night, for which they were grateful. After Ott had returned from scouting the countryside feeling optimistic, the crew of Stardeer prepared to depart again and cross the wide river that separated two vast countries, Galgaria and Gorn. As a bandit thief of some repute once said to me, it is time to fly or die. Commander Binder said. Devlin Dane rose from below deck, rested, and in much better spirits than earlier that day. He asked everyone for news and then made his way to Jasmine, greeting her with one of his wizened, disarming smiles. Good morning, she patronized. I see you've braided your beard. Damn thing keeps getting in the way, he said. Wind always blowing it up in my face. I'm tempted to get rid of it altogether. I'm just afraid that what I'll look like underneath, all withered up like an old gray prune. Jasmine smiled at him. Do you have a minute? Of course, she said, taking him by the elbow. It's time for us to talk. Are you ready for the last leg of this race, my dear? He asked her. Now it comes to it. We draw nigh. The enemy is closing in on this location from all sides. We are nearing the finish line and with them simultaneously. I can feel it, she said. I can feel many things, Devlin. I feel as though things are awakening in me. And I'm frightened by it, especially when I'm alone at night. Yes, I'm sure you are. Don't fear it. Embrace it, my dear, he said to her. It is your destiny. I'm starting to see things, she told him. Visions, I think. Yes? The wizard seemed concerned but more pleased, which comforted her. But nothing I can use. Fleeting colors, fleeting emotions, like I saw in that sinkhole mirror. You may yet have use for such visions, and very soon, if you allow this skill to develop. Allow your visions to solidify and focus. It's a blessing for you. You'll see. That's why I must speak to you now, for we're drawing close to that which we seek, and I must prepare you for it, he said. You must listen closely and remember exactly what I tell you. Yes, she said. I'm ready, Double D. Stardeer moved, easing slowly back out of the tree. The small blue moon, known as Dawn, appeared pale lavender in the cold northern skies between the branches above them. It was still pitch dark, except for a pale glow on the shoulders of the hills on the eastern horizon. Once we've crossed the river, we'll head northeast toward the narrow shins and shoulders of the dark Azar Mountains. We'll follow the desert edge for a day, no more, then into the scrubs and thorns that cover the Azar Plains that was once a great sea many ages ago. I've seen that place, she said. Dirt, thorns, fossils, chalk. I have seen it. Yes, I believe that you will begin to recognize things the closer you get to the stone. It will be calling you because it is, in essence, part of you. It will pull you to itself if you hearken its call. Past the dreary marshes and dead sea of the Scablands, there is an oasis there, hidden and protected, he said. An old forest, beautiful and mystical, like an island in the harsh plains of the Azar wastelands. It's not a large forest, nor is it small. It is no discernible boundaries, and it can't be mapped. No human has set foot in the place nor laid eyes upon it. Not since your legendary forefather, the first great day, walked away from there so long ago. Now the stone awaits you in that place, cradled safely within a small, wondrous cave surrounded by its own magic only you can reach. You're acting strangely, Dedlin. You give me this information as if you won't be with me. You're an observant girl, an amazing girl. What's wrong, Dedlin? Why aren't you telling me? He sighed and smiled at her. You're not the only one with visions. I still have some gift of foresight, and I see a new path rising before me very soon, leading me off in another direction. I'm needed elsewhere, as you'll be soon. And so I'll not be with you much longer on this quest, Jasmine Day. I'm sorry, but ingratiated. Dedlin, I've led you as far as I should and could, as far as I needed to, so that's why you must heed my words now. You must be prepared to finish this undertaking on your own if it comes to that. She faced the night before her as Stardeer crept into the sky without lights and accelerated toward the veil before the river. On my own? What about Gabriel? You must trust me, child, and heed my words now, the wizard said coldly. You've proven yourself the most courageous of our fellowship, and should no longer have any doubts of your power and capabilities. I see a wall arising before us, a dividing obstacle leaping up before our very feet. Beyond that wall, all our paths will separate. I know not who goes together afterward or where. Therefore, you must be prepared to now finish what you have started. alone should it come down to that. Do you understand? I'm listening, she said, resolved and resolute. Tell me what I must do, Devlin, and I'll do it. When you reach the cave, Jasmine Day, and turn the key that releases the stone, you must recite the simple ancient scripture to break your great-great-great-grandfather's splendid spell. In peace, I enter Jean to Jacques. Remember the words. This is very important. I will remember. Thank you, Devlin. You remember? In peace, I enter Jean to Jacques. That's a crazy bunch of words. Yes, she simply said. In peace, I enter Jean to Jacques. The wizard nodded, seemingly pleased with himself. Practice it as often as you are able. He looked up. Stardeer was low and moving fast toward the banks of the dark Gharnian river, as black as pitch now. Ah, the river. Not a good stretch of water, even without Gharnian patrols. Keep an eye out. Stardeer shot out over the lazy, sluggish water from the tree-lined bank, staying low to the surface. The warriors manned their weapons on all sides of the small fighter craft, expecting any kind of ambush. They watched the banks on both sides. Downstream about a mile, they could see an ancient Castile bridge of enormous size stretched across the river from bank to bank, constructed in a series of rusty triangular arches. It was covered at both ends with dark, strangling vines and ivy. It was a perfect spot for the Gharnians to hide and wait. But if they were there, the crew did not see them. Looks good, Binder said. We're halfway across. Maybe we got here before they could get organized. I sure could go for a fresh fish dinner, Ott replied stiffly, peering over the rail into the water with his sharp feline eyes. They're probably so close to the surface, and I'm famished. Me too, Dre replied, but we can't lower nets and disturb the water. If the Gharnians don't see us, the river dragons might. I saw their tracks all over the banks when I scouted earlier this evening. Binder slipped another shovel of algae stone gravel and dust into the fuel separator. Just to let you know, we're running low on fuel, gentlemen, he forewarned, closing the algae stone storage bin. Very low. We'll need to find more soon. Next village, Devlin said. Now keep a lookout. On the eastern banks, remnants of ancient buildings and temples set in broken square foundations were layered up the hillsides. They were inhabited only by denizens of the barren desert border now, lizards and snakes and scorpions, warming themselves on the flat rocks, still warm from the day's suns. A pair of young gray coyotes. Stardeer reached the bank without incident, and keeping low, they headed inland at the same brisk speed, following the craggy walls of a narrow canyon. Look, Gabriel said to them, pointing back towards Galgaraya, we only just made it. Gharnian warships, several crew members stated at the same time. 4 great ships came easing over the trees on the horizon, cutting across a river at a diagonal slant, heading toward the great bridge they had spotted. A fleet of fighter craft ensued behind them, perhaps 30 in all, like hungry fish following great ocean predators for scraps. After a few frightening seconds, all had disappeared behind them. Keep an eagle's eye, Devlin advised. No rest tonight. They had successfully made it over the river unharmed. The morning came with a chill in the air, but the suns were not veiled by clouds, and as morning turned into midday, the temperature began rising rapidly. The ground below was now cracked and brown, dry and barren, blowing with dust and sand. The gnarled, weather-beaten trees were dwarfed and twisted with little but dry cones and long brown needles hanging lifelessly from their limbs. Tufts of brown grasses appeared to have been planted like the barrier walls of a magnificent complex maze. Occasionally, they could discern remnants of walls made from half-buried, upright stones that, too, fit the strange design of some giant maze crisscrossing the countryside for miles. Jasmine climbed to the front bow of the skycraft, the wind pressing past her face, blowing her son's blonde hair back and forth before her eyes. Her arms and legs were outspread to steady her like a frail human spider. There were a few wisps of clouds in the west, just thin lines of white, chalky dust rippled across azure blue. A flock of tiny white beetle birds whipped past, clicking. They spun up and down in synchronized spiral, catching flying insects in their tiny webbed feet. She peered out into the clear distance, across the brown lands of Gorn. The familiarity was unnerving to her, not familiar to her eyes, but to her heart and to some buried memory. She felt it. Familiarity, synchronization, belonging, destiny, danger. The stone was out there. It was calling her. She felt it, and it was a warm feeling of possible reunion. As night came, Dedlin, Gabriel, and Jasmine Day stood side by side at the helm while Percy flew. The air was cool enough to chill. Jasmine held onto the arms of the two men standing pensively and protectively beside her, and they stared out of the window in the coming gloom of night, wondering what the next day would bring. Jasmine felt but did not say that the worst was still yet to come. In silent fellowship they flew, until fatigue overcame her and she retired to her cot below for the night. 61. The next morning they woke with a start. Stardeer was accelerating quickly. "Let's go!" Ott cried out, growling as he crossed the deck. "Battle stations! We've been spotted!" Gabriel sprang from his bunk, dashed up the ladder stairs, and joined Dedlin Dane at the flank of the ship. Several hundred yards behind them, a large black warship, silver battlements glistening in the bright morning suns, rose from a lower position as it angled its flight path directly in behind Stardeer. As the ship advanced upon them, vivid red lettering could be seen as fiery lights, announcing the Khazar 3 in sharp, jagged Gharnian script. "I suppose this was inevitable," Dedlin told the prince. "It's almost certainly had to come to this at some point. It'll be hard to lose them this time." "Nigh on impossible. The word is surely out. This pack of wolverines have focused in on one in the herd, us." Jasmine and Drefrago joined Gabriel and the wizard at the rail. "By the gods," the minstrel swore. There was a creaking sound of hydraulic metal raking against metal. From the bow of the Khazar 3, a rift appeared and began opening with an ear-splitting squeal. It looked like the maw of a great black beetle, opening horizontally, revealing the barrels of 5 large blast guns. The hole was large enough to exhume Stardeer whole. "They're getting awfully close," Gabriel said, "and they are brandishing weapons. We should prepare to..." Suddenly, blaster fire exploded past them, barely missing the main lower rudder. The startled crew held on tight as Percy enacted evasive maneuvers. "They're firing on us," Binder retorted. "Retaliate!" Gabriel seized Jasmine by her shoulders and rushed her toward the stairs to the lower hold. "Take cover," he commanded. "Let us fight for you now." She hesitated, but another blast found its target just then, on deck, destroying one of the 2 remaining mounted blast guns. The impact of the explosion reflected out over the port side of the ship, and amazingly, no one was hurt. Jasmine seceded and went below, sealing the door behind her. "Binder!" the wizard cried. "There's a skycraft charger in the rear hold. Can you manage it?" "I'll try." Another blazing blast fire shot past them, brushing by the port wing with a scrape. It exploded into the woods ahead of them. Fires engulfed the trees almost instantly. "Surrender!" a resonating voice boomed from a speaker behind them. "Take your craft to the ground or you will be forced." Suddenly an explosion flashed behind them this time, a direct hit denting the foremost hull of the Khazar-3. Lake Tobias, the timid castle ranger of Tungulin, stood wide-eyed, clenching the blast gun handles with white-knuckled fists, amazed at the power of the weapon he had just fired. "Good job," Commander Benjamin Binder called to him as he readied Devlin's large charger. This gun was heavy, usually mounted, but Binder intended to do what damage he could with the weapon while holding it in his muscled arms. "Now watch this, Castle Ranger." With the pull of a trigger, an electric surge like a ball of copper lightning fired from the bulbous tip, and it struck the hull of the 50-man Khazar-3 with a loud, searing rip. The air about the crew was filled with blue static electricity. Percy cut hard to the right, ducking below another series of blaster explosives that screamed past. Then he came up hard to the left, slicing between the broken-off trunks of two great trees. Despite its size, the Khazar-3 followed behind them with remarkable dexterity and mobile agility. Now in range, Ott took the opportunity to fire an aerojet. It made a direct hit on the dorsal fin of the Gharnian warship, causing a good-sized fiery crater. He loaded another one and prepared to fire. "Surrender," the voice repeated from the Khazar-3. "Surrender now or you will be destroyed." "To hell with you," Gabriel cried, throwing a small pack over his shoulder. "Make every shot count," he called out to the crew. "Fire! Fire now! I've got a package to deliver." He had unfastened a small one-man sky sled from the cabin hold and was running with it toward the rear of Stardeer. He turned it on, seized the guide stick, and leaped off the stern as he straddled it. He fell, but for a second before the sky sled righted itself, spinning and bobbing right into the path of the mighty oncoming warship. The Khazar-3 suffered 3 more shots simultaneously, Lake with the blast gun, Ott with an aerojet, and Binder with the charger. Devlin cried out, "No more! You'll strike the prince! Give him a chance now!" As the huge warship banked past him, Gabriel shot out a latchkey anchor bolt at it. It hit the hull and caught on the edge of a bent hull plate. He swung around as the ship took up the slack in the wire, and he crashed hard into the side, nearly dislodging him from his precarious seat. He clung there, out of sight of any Gharnian windows, repeatedly slamming into the side of the hull. 62. "Where is he?" Binder cried. "What happened to him?" "He missed the opening," Lake cried. "He's gone. Should we go back to get him?" "Nonsense," the wizard replied. "He wasn't trying to fly into the body of the ship. That would have been foolish indeed. He's hanging there on the damn side of it. Careful now. Don't fire again until he's found footing." 3 more rapid shots fired past him, dangerously close, but Percy was able to dive beneath them, the keel of Stardeer taking a trough in the hardened dirt below. One of the missiles had singed Devlin's beard, another had missed Quan by mere inches. The landscape around them changed as they rode the rim of a shallow canyon. Hills of sandy, rocky earth rose in flattened mounds, nearly depleted of any vegetative growth. They were bordering the deadly Gornian desert, small in comparison to the Persian desert, but many times more perilous. It was a barrier between the Azar mountain range and the Gharnian River, the geographical home of the most dangerous sands in the kingdom, reputedly uninhabitable by any living creature. The perilous sands were intensely reflective, and the tiny grains were as sharp and ruthless as shards of ground glass, but the dunes were as beautiful as they were deadly. Spectacular mountains of crystal gold sand dunes opened up before them and to the right, stretching endlessly over the southern horizon. "Ignore the gold," the Dizzard screeched. "It's not real gold." Percy angled Stardeer right and left, dodging Gharnian missile sights. For a moment, he thought he heard rattling in the turbines at his feet, as if there were some damage there, causing him to fret with concern. He did not need any malfunction during the crisis. He must remain an elusive target. The guide stick began trembling slightly at his hand. He took Stardeer down low, sometimes only inches from the rocks jutting up from the sand. The shadow of the Gharnian warship covered them from above. Meanwhile, Gabriel had found footing on the side of the warship, and he had climbed to the edge of a small ventilation plate. Hoping to find a weakness in the soaring structure, he opened a hole in the side of the engineering station of the Khazar 3 with several shots from his blaster. He began firing repeatedly into the great ship, wreaking whatever havoc he could to the drive and propulsion gear. Then he took back the pack from the shoulder and stuffed it into the smoking hole he had made. He had explosives. The Gharnians fired again. Percy pulled back hard, barely soaring above the passing missiles. An exploding boulder pummeled Stardeer's undercarriage with meteoric shrapnel, lifting the ship several feet in the air. The crew flew in every direction. "Those imbecilic Gharnians!" Devlin cried. He looked out over the rail at the dark windows of the Khazar 3 and shook his fist at them. "If you destroy us, you'll never find the stone you seek, fools!" "And neither will we," Dreher added, setting down another crate of munitions. "Use these if you can." Commander Binder could see two dark silhouetted figures moving like shadows behind the wide front bay windows of the ship, shielded by a thin veiled deflector. It was the warship's cockpit. They were the pilots, and they were foolishly close. "Ott!" he shouted, an idea forming in his mind. He set the charger aside and picked up an old gladiator's shield. "Pythagoras, come over here. I need you." Devlin stepped up onto the rear mooring, arms and legs spread wide. He began waving his walking stick out vertically before him like a baton, in a figure eight, in a lying on its side motion. His eyes were closed, and his mouth moved, chanting some words that no one else could hear. Then, the front bow of the Khazar 3 began to obey Devlin's strange commands. It began to bow and rise, following Devlin's lead, right and left, up and down, in greater and greater increments in a figure eight advancement. This magic taxed the wizard, though. His face grew red and sweat poured from him. Binder took a few steps back, as if preparing to charge. He turned and ran across the deck. "Now, Pythagoras!" he cried as he leaped off the back of Stardeer at the Khazar 3. Ott fired an arrowjet at the warship's bay window. It exploded, rendering the Gharnian's deflector shield temporarily useless. The thick glass cracked with spreading spiderwebs. Binder tucked himself behind the gladiator's shield that was strapped to his arm and shoulder and burst through the enemy's front window, rolling into the cockpit like a huge human cannonball. Blaster fire in the galley almost immediately. It lit. "I bet they weren't expecting that," Ott said. Gabriel came crawling across the top of the Khazar 3 and scaled down toward the busted bay window. As soon as he was in range, he fired his blaster at the enemy inside, calling frantically for Commander Binder to retreat with him. The Khazar 3 had not fired upon Stardeer for some time. In fact, it had begun to slow a bit, veering off to the right. From inside came a sudden explosion. Devlin cheered. "Bless him!" Gabriel set off a sun bomb. Flames and white light were erupting from the massive hole in the side. "There's Commander Binder," Dreher said. "Look!" The crew could see Gabriel pulling Binder from the window. He was injured, and his military jacket sleeve was in flames. Gabriel helped him pull it off of him while they scaled the warship toward the top. Behind them, 4 Gharnian warriors emerged from the smoke as well, all of them also in flames. Their purple capes whipped viciously in the hot wind. The foremost, a large, fierce-looking general, drew his blaster and began firing at Gabriel and Binder. A sudden aerojet explosion dislodged 2 of the Gharnians. General Moon Jacarad had a good grip on an exhaust duct and did not fall, and the other soldier was holding desperately onto the general. Ott growled, loading another aerojet. To the crew's dismay and horror, another Gharnian ship, a 500-man command ship, the largest skycraft ever constructed, came racing over the western horizon like an upside-down flying mountain. It flew for them with great fury, darkening the sky. Stardeer choked and stuttered as if she were dragging some heavy weight behind her. She coughed, rode on steadily for a bit, and then sputtered again. Percy held onto the guide stick lightly. Suddenly, they began to lose altitude and control. "Something's wrong," he cried. "Not now, not now." "We've been hit," Ott said. "We're falling." "Brace yourselves," Dreher shouted. "We're not hit," Percy exclaimed fearfully, looking frantically at his gauges. He suddenly realized the real problem. "We're out of fuel." Devlin had already diagnosed the problem. Just as his Stardeer began falling toward the desert floor like a stone, the wizard tossed the last 3 chunks of algae stone into the pressure bin and slammed it shut. "Expand, damn you!" he frantically ordered, wishing there were magic in those words or anything else he could do. The textured dunes drew nearer and nearer. "Hold on," Percy cried out. Gabriel had secured the sky sled once again and hoisted it up by the anchor wire to the top of the Khazar 3. He set injured Binder on the seat and turned it on. The sky sled whirred to life and began to slide backwards off the smoking warship. Gabriel ran unsteadily down the quivering spine of the Khazar 3 after it, firing over his shoulder at the pursuing Gharnians. Just as the sled slid off into space, Gabriel leaped onto Binder's hunched back, and they disappeared together into the billowing clouds of trailing blue and black smoke. General Moon Jacarad reached the apex, firing blindly into the swirling clouds, hoping he hit the 2 escaping saboteurs. Several others joined in there, firing a rapid volley of blaster shots into the thick, greasy smoke, although they were unable to see any sign of their targets anymore. Just breaching the crest of a dune, Stardeer began falling into a wide valley, hovering just a few feet above the sloping bank. Suddenly, her turbines roared back into life as the expanded fuel ignited. Unfortunately, it had happened too late. As she lurched to life, Percy pulled the guide stick back as far as he could go, but the next dune rose up too high to miss. With a sudden sandy burst, a cloud of gold erupted as Stardeer's nose plunged deep into the crest. The skycraft spun up and over, backwards, rolling wildly through the air, hitting another dune, then stood up upon its side as the gyroscope struggled to interpret her correct position. Stardeer righted herself clumsily as she slid slowly backwards down the hillside, hovering just inches above the flaming Gharnian sands, and stalled at the bottom, motionless. Percy had somehow kept his grip on the guide stick. He turned Stardeer around and slowly accelerated up and out of the valley bed. With a clank and a tumble, Gabriel and Commander Binder fell back aboard the wrecked fighter craft, rolling listlessly onto the floor. Percy increased his speed, scanning the east. With a stuttering roar, Stardeer obeyed the Mehekians' demanding commands and shot off from the desert floor away from the tumults like a comet. We'll stop there and we'll do part 2 of Flight into Gorn tomorrow.